episode of Quilt with the Stars is brought to you by Baby Lock, for the love of sewing, P&B Fabrics, our fabrics, your lifestyle, and Koala Cabinets, sewing furniture custom built in America. You know, it's a big world out there, a big quilting world, and there are stars in that world. And today we have a star with us from the quilting world, for sure, Nancy Mahoney. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Mary. I appreciate you inviting me.
Well, you look lovely, and it's really a pleasure to meet you because I have heard your name for so many years. I was, around quilts my whole life, and Nancy Mahoney was always a name that my mom said with a lot of admiration and respect, and so it's really cool to meet you.
Oh, thank you. I've loved your mom for a long time and really admired her as well. So
makes two of us.
Nice meeting you.
Cool. So the show today is kind of in three parts. We're going to talk to Nancy and get to know her a little bit better, talk about some of the projects that she's working on and has worked on in her career so far. And then we're going to take a look at a demo, a quick little mini demo. And then we're going to have a trunk show. And I'm excited because I asked specifically not to see the quilts before we do the trunk show so I can be as delighted and surprised as everybody watching. So let's talk about you. How long have you been making quilts and sewing? I know you did sewing first, right?
I started out sewing. I started out making garments as well as doing alterations. I did alterations for many, many years. And it was when I was working at a fabric store in Boise, Idaho, that one of my coworkers and I decided that we were going to make a quilt. And it was the centennial of 1976.
Yeah.
There was no cotton fabric available, and we made our cardboard templates. Needless to say, I've never made that quilt. But it did start me into the quilting world and got me kind of thinking about making quilts. But it was a few years after that that I actually made my first quilt.
That bicentennial started so many quilters. That's when my mom started. There was just this interest, a resurgence of interest in the quilting, in the art of quilt making, and that's really cool. You're part of that school.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah. I'm from that generation, you might say. So,
absolutely.
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. So from there, so when did you catch the bug? Like, when did it strike you that you were a quilter?
Well, I'd not only always made garments and done a lot of sewing, but I always did a lot of handwork as well. And there was one time when I had a quilt that my grandmother had made. Actually, it was my great-grandmother, and it was a utility quilt. And we had used it, enjoyed it, and loved it, and it had become quite threadbare. So I decided one day I was going to cover it, as they did in the old traditions, and I was going to take the old quilt off the top and use what was in the center for the center of my quilt.
Oh, I love that.
I didn't make that quilt either.
So you're not necessarily a finisher? Like
I'm a finisher.
You're a finisher.
I'm a finisher. But that's when I went to the quilt. And I went to the quilt store and I went, oh my goodness, now there's all this new fabric and there's all these tools and there's rotary cutting equipment. And I took a class and that was it. I was hooked. And that's been 30 years ago, really. And I've been quilting ever since then. And
you were one of the people, lots of people started to quilt, and lots of people do start to quilt, but you began to make quilts as a career. I mean, and designing fabric, and so that's the I have all kinds of questions about your career as a fabric designer and as a quilt maker and an author. We have a couple of Nancy's books right here. In fact, can you tell me a little bit about this one first?
Well, this one is my book, Treasures from the 30s, and it's my third book on 30s styles quilts. So that I've collected as part of my things that I like to do. I like to collect antiques, and I collect patterns that would have been available in the 30s. And I've based 3 books on those patterns that I got through antique stores and collected, and put these into these books, and so it's really fun. And then I can use my 33 productions fabrics that I do with PMB.
Absolutely, and we have some of those, and some of these quilts, well, all of them are just, they're so beautiful, and that vintage style is really popular again, you know. And you were saying sometimes you go to sometimes online, but also in the shops, you'll buy even just blocks, sometimes tops, sometimes full quilts.
Yes.
How fun. That's so fun. And then there's this book too, which is kind of a Nancy Mahoney's greatest hits.
Well, this is Fast and Fusible Flower Quilts, and this is from a lot of quilts that I've done over the years, and some of them have been in magazines, and they were just pulled out from those quilts, and I've kind of reintroduced them in this new book. I love doing applique, and it's been real fun. I'm kind of an eclectic quilter, and I like a lot of different styles. I've not really done just one type of style.
I respect that, because I'm kind of in a groove. I kind of have a look that I'm making lots of quilts in that look, but I don't want to get into a rut, so that's good. I'm glad to hear that you're not ever in a rut either. And you have another book like out now on paper piecing, right?
On paper piecing, yes.
Cool,
yes.
cool. And that's all martingale,
Yes,
right?
and that will be my newest book. That's the newest book.
Awesome. Well, let's take a look at some of this fabric too. You were talking about the reproduction fabric that you do for P&B, and we have some of it here, and it's like darling, and it's so hot off the presses right now that we don't even have huge pieces of it because it's like being printed.
Correct. At this time,
right? Just darling. Tell me a little bit about where you found some of these.
Well, these are from pieces that I found in my old quilts. I go through my quilts, I lay them out, the blocks, and I might pick one piece out of one block and another piece out of a top or a quilt that I happen to have. And I generally like to start with a main piece, and so we started with this piece. And then I pull out other pieces that are various scales and textures. I like to include some novelties, because 30s was a time for novelties. That's when our novelty and conversational prints first came out. And then I like to do something where I'll have a little bit darker print to add some contrast, some that have a lighter background, and again, some that are just smaller scale and just fun
They're darling. The little shovels and these little hash marks, these fabrics are great. If you're a newer quilter, you'll find soon that some fabric works really well in piecing and some works differently in piecing. It's not that it doesn't work well, but these little Depression era prints are tiny, and they're just, you'll use them again and again and again. I do. I mean, I just think they're great. And I wanted to show one thing. This was in the swatches that you brought. I thought this was so cool. I just wanted to show it to people. This is what's called a strike-off. When you're designing fabric and they print up some samples, this is what it looks like as you're working through the process. I just think that's neat how it bleeds off, just into the muslin, the plain muslin.
Well, you know what they're doing, Mary, is this is where your repeat is.
Oh, neat.
So what they're doing is that somewhere on this other side, this is where it fits in and it joins in for a screen.
I love it. I'm learning all kinds of things. I want to do it. I want to design some fabric. Cool.
It's really fun.
And then there's another line we want to look at before we go to our demo.
This is Florenzia, and Florenzia is that other side of me that likes to have these dark, rich colors that I can use with applique and my floral quilts.
Couldn't be more different. You're right. You are not like in a rut by any means. This is lovely. Really, really nice florals and
it's a really fun. This piece is really fun. It's a nice, beautiful, rich colors, and then you have all the coordinates that go with it. So.
Great, beautiful. So before we go to the demo, I wanted to talk about your other family member. You live in Florida with your husband, and you all have a little, you have a pet?
We have an unusual pet for a lot of people. I have an umbrella cockatoo, and his name is Prince.
I think we can get a picture of Prince in here. The stories about your bird are so awesome. I just love it that you have, and he's been with you for a while, right?
We've had him he's 30 years old, and we've had him for 30 years. We got him when he was 3 or 4 years old. So.
And he's moved around the country with you as you've moved?
He has. When we moved from Seattle, we had to take him on the plane with us, but of course you couldn't carry him in the no one would want him actually in the part of the plane where the people are.
Yeah.
So we had to put him in the hold, and he had to go into a dog carrier, and we had to buy him a plane ticket, which cost more than our plane ticket. And he had to go in the hold, and we were sitting in the plane, and we could hear him down in the hold squawking.
No. Was he talking?
No, he's just loud. He was just screaming. He was unhappy, and so he was screaming down in the hold, and we could think, oh yeah, that's our bird down there.
That's our Prince. That's part of our family.
He's fun. He's fun.
Yeah, beautiful. That beautiful white
feathers. He likes
to
help me make quilts.
Does he really? How does he help? He just watches and makes sure.
He watches and makes sure I'm doing it correctly. And if I would let him, if I have a quilt in my lap and I'm sewing on the binding, he likes to crawl underneath the quilt and hide under the quilt. Yeah.
That's so cool. Well, for more on Nancy, go to nancymahoney.com, and P&B and Martingale. All those places are places where you can find more about Nancy. So let's take a look at this block, the quilt behind us. We're gonna do a demo on this awesome fan block. This episode of Quilt with the Stars is brought to you by Baby Lock, for the love of sewing. P&B Fabrics, our fabrics, your lifestyle. And Koala Cabinets, sewing furniture custom built in America.